If you're starting to get into film score writing or TV score writing and you're not exactly sure how things lay out on the actual page so that you can turn over to an actual live orchestra, well, that's what we're going to go over today. Hi, my name is Santiago Valencia. Thank you again for stopping by. It's great to see you. Right now we're going to be going doing a little bit of a mini series on how things lay out on the actual page of a score, okay? We're going to start off today about talking about the main sections and how they actually sit on the piece of paper. So let me go ahead and give you a breakdown on how those sections will lay out in order from top to bottom. Let's get started. All right, here we go. Again, I'm really excited that you're here. Thank you so much for being here. All right, let's get to business here. We are trying to see what happens on the page of a full film score, okay? And in order for us to do that, we first have to know what's going to go on that page. Tons of instruments that we have to our disposal to write for, okay? Now, these instruments typically come in groups, and those groups are typically called sections, okay? So let's go ahead and look at the main sections that you're going to find in a film score page layout, okay? If you look at 100 different film scores from, the last 50 years or more, from 100 different composers, you're going to see some similarities. And those similarities is that you're going to see these sections basically, typically in kind of the same hierarchy or order on the actual page. One of the very first sections that you're going to find on the very top is a section known as our woodwinds. Our woodwinds include instruments such as, let's see, like a flute or an oboe, maybe clarinets. And we're going to go a little bit further into what each section has as far as instruments is concerned. We're going to go over that in another episode. But for now, let's go ahead and talk about main sections. So the next section that you're going to find below the woodwinds is typically the brass section, okay? Brass section is going to typically have, the trombones and the trumpets, et cetera, in that section there. Now, the next section below that is what I consider to be pretty much the most diverse and the section that you're going to have the most different kinds of instruments in, and that is known as the percussion section. The percussion section could include the timpani, the clave, maybe even the triangle. And there's a huge assortment of instruments that you're able to choose that you want to include in your score that belong just to the percussion section, okay? Now, a funny little side note. Some school of thought, some composers might consider that the piano, for example, is actually considered kind of a percussion instrument. Why is that? Well, that's because when you're playing a piano, you're actually hitting the keys on the keyboard to create the sound. And that hitting, you're doing it in a percussive manner, and therefore some people consider the piano or like the harpsichord or the organ, for example. They'll kind of sometimes include that in the percussion section. But in our more, modern day, we don't always exactly include that. We tend to have our piano in its own section, and that would basically be known as our keyboard section, which goes below the percussion section. The keyboard selection, could be, like I said, the piano, maybe the organ, the harpsichord, the celeste or the celesta, depending on how you want to pronounce it, is a very, very used instrument. It's just as much as the piano sometimes, okay? So you're going to find all those instruments kind of in the keyboard section. In between the percussion and the keyboard section, you're going to find another very important instrument, and that's going to be the harp, okay? So far we've got woodwinds, brass, percussion, harp, and keyboards, okay? In our more modern day film scores, we are more and more hearing more modern type instruments. What I'm talking about are synthesizers, or synths, okay? If you're a composer like David Newman or Hans Zimmer, you're going to really include a fair amount of synthesizers in your works. So therefore, we have moved forward, kind of adapted and included that synth section on the page. Typically, you're going to find that below the keyboard section, okay? Now, if you're John Williams and you're about to score the next Star Wars film or the next, Harry Potter film, John Williams loves to include choir, okay? So the choir section is typically going to be found below that. Now, choir is sometimes called the chorus. The chorus is sometimes called the choir. They're kind of interchangeable in that sense. Now, in my personal opinion, depending on the composer, depending on the film, you're sometimes going to incorporate different kinds of instruments that are not exactly typical to the modern day film score, okay? And those instruments don't per se have a section here yet. So I'm going to kind of, for my own purposes, kind of include an additional section. Now, what goes into this additional section as far as instruments? Well, it could be like the guitar or the electric guitar or even the electric bass guitar. Those can typically be found in an additional score, and the composer will include that in there. And then typically you're going to find those additional instruments, kind of typically in this area here, okay? And then the most important section that belongs on the page, can anyone guess? The string section, of course. The string section is the heart and soul of our sound when it comes to film scores. It has been for generations, for decades. The string section has been a part of our music for, as far as Bach. So that has not changed even to today when it comes to our film scores and classical musics. The string section is the core. You'll see a lot of instruments go on top of the string section, to the side, to the bottom, but that string section is really what holds it all together, okay? So typically, if you look at the film score layout page, you're going to find the string section at the bottom, okay? So here we are. We have woodwinds, brass, percussion, harp, keyboards, synths, choir, additional instruments, and string section at the bottom. These are our main sections that are going to be going on our page layout, okay? Next up, we're going to go ahead and break this down. We're going to go ahead and go into each section, and I'm going to try to give you a nice robust list of all the instruments that you can typically consider going into these sections. We're going to go into woodwinds, brass, percussion, et cetera, so you have a full list, or as full as I can give you, of instruments that you're going to be able to use in your writings, in your compositions, in your film scores. You need to know exactly what you can pull from in order to use it, okay? So that's going to be coming up on the next section. Well, thanks for stopping by. It's been great to have you again. On the next one, we're going to go delve in a little bit more into the instruments, full list. We'll see you then. Until then, it's been a real slice. Take care.